was the summer of 1973, and I was 8 years old. And in Margie Sennett's basement, I found a vinyl copy of an album that would change my life. The album was called Free to Be You and Me by Marlo Thomas and friends. And every story and every song on that album was a radical concept to my conservative Southern upbringing. Free to Be You and Me became a prophet for a life I never knew existed. And in turn, I became obsessed with all things Marlo Thomas. And I became convinced at 8 years old that if she and I were ever to meet, we would become best friends forever. We were living right outside of New York City at the time, and I read that Marlo Thomas was going to be a guest of the Macy's Day Parade. And I begged my parents to not only take me, but to let us go early enough so that I could sit right by the stands where the celebrities sat. And they agreed. When we got there, there were TV crews setting up, and one of the TV guys announced that they were going to be picking people from the audience to stand beside the celebrities to make them look human or something. And I saw this as my chance, and I wove my way through the crowd, and I found the guy in charge, and I explained to him everything that I loved about Marlo Thomas. And I also showed him my Free to Be You and Me scrapbook that I had made. And he, I guess, reluctantly agreed to put me on with Marlo. So I went back and I told my mother. My mother then ran to the nearest payphone, and she called long distance to every cousin, every aunt, every friend she knew back in Alabama, and told them they had to watch the Macy's Day Parade. When we got back, the director called me down, and my mother insisted on coming with me. She said it was for moral support, but I knew she just wanted to be on TV so her friends could see her. And then the director called down Marlo, and she sparkled, and she shined exactly the way I imagined she would. And I stood there and listened as they talked about some project she was in, and then the TV host introduced me as Marlo's biggest fan. And I went weak in the knees. I was so like heady by this endorsement I had just gotten. And so I guess an 8-year-old child standing there with their mouth agaw is not great television. And so Marlo then perked up and she said, "That sure is a nice book you've got there. Would you like me to autograph it?" And I said, "Yes, please." That's all I could squeak out. "Do you happen to have a pen?" Darn, I didn't have a pen. And I saw the host pat down all of his pockets, and I saw Marlo scan the crowd, and I knew if I did not produce a pen right then, I was going to lose her forever. And then I remembered my mom, and I reached back into her big mom purse, and my hand, like an expert pickpocketer, we were rummaging through all the stuff she had, and I found lipsticks, and I found hand lotions, and then I found it. A pen. And it wasn't just any pen. It was one of those big blue and white pens that had a color selector top, you know? And I thought, oh, Marlo's gonna like this because she'll have choices, and that'll make her like me even more. And so I whipped the pen out of my mom's purse, and I waved it in front of Marlo's face, and I go, "I've got exactly what you need. I've got exactly what you need, and you can keep it." I saw Marlo look over to the host. I saw the host go white and a bit slack-jawed. I, however, was clueless. I thought I was holding a pen. And so instead of the big blue and white pen with a color selector top, I had found another circular item at the bottom of my mom's purse that was white with bold blue letters, TAMPAX. Yeah. I thought Marlo didn't hear me, so I waved it even more in front of her face. And I said, this is my mom's favorite, and she says you can keep it, and she'll be so glad you used it. Yeah. And then Marlo did the most Marlo thing ever. She looked right into the camera, and she said, isn't it great when a fan gives you something you can actually use? And she plucked that tampon, put it in her pocket, and the host took his cue and escorted her out. No autograph, no explanation. I knew I would be just another face in the crowd of Marlo's life. Years later, I was working at Auburn University, and as a perk of working in the president's office, you got to take the speakers to dinner beforehand. And it was the 1980s, and Phil Donahue was king of afternoon television. And I was excited to talk to him because I was a broadcast major. And I thought, well, this would be great. But I also was excited because Phil Donahue is married to Marlo Thomas. And even though my obsession had waned, it was not totally gone. And so at dinner that night, I said, Mr. Donahue, what would be your most embarrassing moment? And he looked at me with that little twinkle he would get in his eye. And he said, I am so lucky. I just don't get embarrassed. But my wife, Marlo Thomas, she has the most adorable story she tells. And she loves telling it to all of our dinner parties. And as I listened to Phil tell my story back to me, it awakened that 8-year-old fan in me. And all I could think is, she remembers me. She remembers me. I knew we would be best friends forever.